Good morning, everybody. Again, Steve Adicott, Vice President of Client Services here at Caveon Test Security. We are very pleased to present today an encore presentation of the plenary session Dr. John Fremer presented last month in Vancouver at the National Association of Test Directors Conference. And it was pretty cool. Unbeknownst to us, the group bestowed a certificate of recognition on John for outstanding outstanding contributions to educational assessment. Here's what that certificate looked like. The font's pretty small, so really the highlights, John was recognized for over 40 years of contribution to educational assessment. And over those decades, many of you know he's been a prolific author, he's been a prolific speaker, and a tireless zealot for the integrity and the furthering of educational assessments. So with that as a backdrop, I now want to introduce John, and we'll get cracking on presenting how to avoid becoming another Atlanta Public Schools. And I just gave a introduction of the session and you, so I think we're ready to proceed.
Sure. I am not the world's swiftest technology guy, I'm sorry to say. So there are three parts to my presentation: the Atlanta story, lessons from Atlanta, and then sources of assistance available to you if you're determined not to have your situation be like what happened in Atlanta. And having been very intimately involved in that event, I'm very highly motivated to help other people avoid what happened there. So let's move on then to the first part, what we're calling the Atlanta story. Caveon Test Security had a contract with the Atlanta Educational Foundation, which was a helping group for the school district. Community leaders, college presidents, United Way, a whole bunch of folks that cared about the schools and banded together and donated money for fellowships and equipment and the like, and to help out when the district was asked to conduct an extensive foundation study of potential cheaters that had been identified by an organization known as the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, working with data from the vendor for the state, which was CPD. So we didn't have a contract with the Atlanta Public Schools, nor with the state of Georgia. We were working with this outside group, the Atlanta Educational Foundation. And the project that we were awarded was to do a security audit of the activities that the district had done and to do a limited form of Caveon data forensics. So we can go to the next slide. Here's my overall take of the situation in Atlanta. I know a great deal about it, but I'm willing to bet that no one knows everything about it. It's so complicated. But the situation was that there were persistent accusations of cheating in the Atlanta Public Schools. They were coming from quite a number of sources. And the Atlanta Public School reaction was consistent. We do not have major problems in our school system. We've had occasional problems. Any significant sized district does, but we do not have major problems. Those reports are wrong. The newspaper, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, is prejudiced against us and writes those kind of stories because they write bad things about everything we do. And in particular, the governor of the state is out to get our superintendent. So anything that comes out of something called the governor's office cannot be credited as being true. But the Governor's Office of Student Achievement and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution were not going to be put off by that stance on the part of the school system. So let's move on to the next slide. We did our analyses, and our analyses showed the same thing as any other analyses that had been done. There was unmistakable evidence of improprieties. Those problems were impossible to miss. It didn't matter what form of analysis you did. In the extreme cases, they were so pronounced that there's no other interpretation that there was widespread malfeasance. The worst school, the probability that their results would have occurred by chance was 1 over 10 to the 52nd power. And what we did for this Atlanta Educational Fund was array all the schools, starting with the worst, next worst, assuming that the district would then go forward and investigate, starting, as we always recommend, with the most extreme and obvious cases. But that never got to happen. The governor of the state just was so disgusted with previous Atlanta public school responses that he wasn't going to trust them to do any investigation. And he commissioned the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to do a full-scale legal investigation, seemingly with no restrictions on how extensive it would be or what it would cost. And what happened was 61 agents were assigned to go into schools and talk to principals and school district test coordinators and teachers. Those agents were provided with subpoena powers to get information that they needed. They were given the ability to offer deals. And I was both interviewed by 4 of them in my own home office, and I heard presentations about what they did. They did what you could see on Law and Order or CSI or NCIS. Okay, Fremer, I know you're guilty. No sense denying it. You've got a choice. You can confess to this guilt that we know exists, and we won't prosecute you, so you won't have to go to prison. You might lose your job and you might lose your license, or you can insist, though, that you're innocent, in which case you almost certainly will lose your job and your license and will prosecute you, and you'll probably go to jail. So the next slide then gives the outcome of this work. The superintendent was out of her job, and she was a national and highly regarded award-winning educator. All of her deputy superintendents were also out. Many of the principals and teachers who had this very troublesome and worrisome data confessed. So there's this confession after confession. Now, I learned from the lead attorney that none of them confessed on the first interview. The confessions were obtained with multiple interviews and also going outside the school site. Some pleaded the Fifth Amendment. I don't know, they might have had lawyers in their family or relationships with lawyers. Whatever the reason, they said that we refused to answer on the grounds that it might incriminate us. That didn't help them at all because they were simply declared to be guilty. And all of the ones who either confessed or didn't answer were judged guilty and their names were published. So just think of the impact on someone who didn't think they had done anything wrong, but were advised not to answer the questions. Now, as far as the world is concerned, they're guilty. So that situation became a national press story, and all of the teachers and educators in the system had to live with the fact that everybody knows that all of the teachers and others in Atlanta public schools were guilty, even though that's not true. I'm quite certain, I'd stake anything on it, that the overwhelming majority of teachers and other educators in the Atlanta public schools did not cheat or do anything else wrong with respect to the tests, but they were hurt by this, as were students who were misclassified and families whose students got inappropriate treatment because of these falsified test scores. So let me stop at this point and see if there are any questions. Hello?
John, this is Skylar. I'll wait for questions for about 10 or 15 seconds. If I don't see any come through, we can proceed.
Sure. I'm glad to hear your voice, Skylar, because I had this terrible feeling I was speaking out to the void with no one out there.
Okay.
That's reassuring.
Sure. So I'm here. John, we did have a question come in that said, how many teachers actually confessed?
The last number that I saw was 171 educators, teachers, or principals. But I know for sure that the investigations continue because 2 days ago I got a call from the Fulton County District Attorney's Office trying to clarify some aspect of our work. So this is not over. This is a continuing event, kind of a tragedy for the innocent people involved in this situation.
Okay, John, I have a couple other questions here. I'll try to make sure I'm reading the right chain because I've got a question and then a follow-up. The first is the presumption of guilt legal? And then as a follow-up to that, it says that is the plead the fifth? If they plead the fifth, how can judgment be passed so quickly? Seems to evade due process.
Because I'm not an attorney, so you're just getting a psychometrician and a test program person talking. It's my sense that the kinds of guidelines that they were operating under are more the guidelines for professional review of educators within the state of Georgia. And I remember hearing that from one of the attorneys that was interviewing me, that in their setting, you have to answer questions. You're licensed within the state, and that makes you subject to a set of rules. And currently under those rules, these are not the rules of being in the courtroom, but under those rules, if you don't answer a question where an assumption might be that you didn't answer it because you're guilty, they simply write you down as guilty. Now, the publishing of all those names strikes me as an amazing outcome because if any of these instances ever go into a courtroom setting, the notion that everyone was put in the newspaper as being guilty strikes me as a very odd background for trying to try a case about that. Are those all the questions?
No, I do have another interesting question that just came in, and it says at what grade level or levels were most incidents involved? And were students also interviewed? I would think so, but also to what extent or how many?
In the bulk of the work that was done, it's my understanding that they did not interview students, that they work with teachers and other school personnel. But when they got into full steam, if I had to guess, and I don't know the answer, I bet that they did interview students. They did, by their own account, the way you would investigate any other potential crime. You know, hang around the schoolyard or the barbecue on the weekend or the store where people go asking, did you ever hear anything? And the investigators were also, through their ability to discover, got a lot of information about past complaints that had been dismissed by Atlanta Public Schools Central, but were all recorded. So there was now information about prior history that turned up in the investigation. I think Skylar and Steve, we should go on just because there are other topics too.
Very good.
So I want to move on then to next part is just 2 classes of lessons, just 2 slides. But I think these lessons are really important ones. First, if you're managing a program, to me, one of the #1 lessons is don't make political leaders mad at you. Or in a testing environment where you're not in education, anyone, the board of directors, you know, the head of your certification body, these folks in Atlanta, I don't know what they thought the governor was going to do when they didn't follow his, you know, strongly worded suggestions that would have been directives if he had direct authority. Perform cheating analyses routinely, and then jumping down to bullets, follow up thoroughly on all actions, and take appropriate and public action. You know, just dismissing complaint after complaint and saying, well, we know, Mr. Weisenberger or Mr. Adicott, and they wouldn't have done that, so we don't have to follow it seriously. Doesn't make sense. Evaluate the adequacy of your security procedures, I think, is very important advice, but not particularly related to what happened in Atlanta. Atlanta, curiously, had quite good training procedures, manuals, observation programs on paper, at least, even some limited data analyses, but they didn't do what they were committed to do. So they had these policies, but some subset, it's still a relatively small subset. I can look at how many educators, we're talking 3 or 4%, but ordinarily it's probably 1% or less that misbehave in any setting. So 3 or 4% is a big number. Next slide. Media lessons. I've had probably an interview a week for the last 18 months, many of them related to the Atlanta Public Schools situation. So I'm not an expert at it. I've not been trained, but I have a pretty good understanding of what kind of questions get asked and what's behind them and so on. And one thing for sure, you are going to get media attention if you have a cheating institute that gets out in your program. So you need to be out there with your own story. Don't wait until somebody beats the data out of you. And a good example, in Baltimore, they had a cheating incident. They got right on it. They investigated. They held press conferences. When it was all over, they got credit for their handling of that cheating incident, instead of people saying, oh, gee, they had a cheating incident in their schools. Cultivate the media that are most relevant to your program, and recognize that almost everyone that I've dealt with, including some quite conscientious and well-known reporters, they do not understand test results. It's not their field, it's not their training, and we're going beyond test results. We're going on what we call data forensics, detailed analyses of whether or not there's really evidence of cheating. So you're going to have to use metaphors, you're going to have to simplify, you're going to have to be open. But if you don't tell the story that you think is there to be told, don't depend on somebody else telling the story accurately for you. And a problem that you're going to face is that these are reporters, and they're writing stories that they think people would be interested in. And if you report to them that you had a whole year's worth of administrations and not one problem, that's not likely to be a story. But one terrible incident of collaborative cheating, particularly by educators and principals, that's a story, and that's going to be run. You need to learn who you can trust. I've learned that myself, most reporters. I try to be as open as I can, because then I don't have to remember what I said last. Say the truth every time, be as thorough as you can. It's a lot easier. But you don't have to fall over yourself with people that you can learn are going to try to misrepresent what you say. They're going to try to twist it. I'm not super ace at it, but listen to the questions, because sometimes they'll keep asking you the same question over and over again that you've already answered. And what I've come to realize is they're looking for a quote that will support their position that may be exactly the opposite of what you believe. But if they keep asking you, they'll find something that you said that you can use in that way. And if that's happening to me, I assume it's happened to everyone who's interviewed. And then finally, don't expect a cheating story once it gets out to go away. If it got small attention the first time, you may not see it again. But if it got front page attention, if they're in a series, it's not going to stop. They're going to run it every year. The next year that you go into testing, they'll remind everyone about the problem you had the previous year. And when the results get out, they'll want to compare this year's with last year's and the years before, and you can't stop that. You don't have the power. I mean, they put out papers all the time, or give other stories. They can print what they want, when they want, within journalistic limitations. You can't do that. You have to work hard to get any attention at all to your side. I think we have a poll here. Is that true?
That's right, John. At this point, we have a poll. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. So you'll see on your screen, it'll come up. And the question that we have for you is, has there been media coverage of a cheating incident within your testing program in the last 3 years? So we're going to give maybe 1.5, 2 minutes for everyone to have a chance to answer. Okay, we're getting close to about 85% of people voted. If you haven't had a chance yet, please do so. We'll give you about 10 more seconds to vote, and then we'll see the results. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. It's been a full minute. And let's share the results. The results, John, if you can't see them on your screen, to the question of has there been media coverage of a cheating incident within your testing program in the last 3 years, is 43% said yes, and then 57% said no. And that was about 90% of the people on the webinar that voted.
I'm very happy for the 57%, and to recognize that we have a broad group signed on. Some of them are testing in a less public environment, and many of them in state and district folk where everything they do is pretty much open to inspection. Did you get any questions, Skylar?
I do have some questions that came in as we continued after our last round of questions, and we'll probably have some at the end of the session. So if we don't answer your question in the time given, hang out and at the end of John's session, and we'll try to answer all your questions. I do have one here I'd like to ask, because I think a lot of people probably are wondering the same thing, John, and that is, what new test security measures are being discussed in the K-12 community to take the trust model out of the classroom or school districts that are in a conflict of interest to receive funds, etc., from high test scores?
Most of the things that people are doing can be classified as either before, during, or after. And before, a lot of attention to making sure that tests are kept secure. During, we seem to be moving more toward a model of fairly continual observation of what happens. And then after, running cheating detection routinely. The pressures, which I think part of what that question is probably after, I don't think the pressures are going away. The incentives to want to look as good as you can are still out there. And my wife was a teacher, and my youngest daughter is a teacher, and I know them, not just them, but their colleagues and friends and folks I've met. Teaching is a very honorable profession. It has way less examples of misbehavior than other areas. But if you keep ratcheting up the pressure and tell teachers, well, we're going to judge you based on how your students did when you have no control over what group of students you got this year and other things you'd like to do, I think that's going to be a continuing problem. Anything else, Skylar?
Yeah, I do have another one here that says, and this might be something that a lot of people know, but probably a lot don't know, and it says, how did the school officials cheat? At what point in the testing process did the test security processes break down?
In the Atlanta situation, that's easy, because the analyses that were done were primarily erasure analyses, looking for unusual numbers of erasures in a particular class, in a particular test, and hard to explain patterns, like every time you erased, you went from a wrong to a right answer. And groups of students in the same class made the same erasures. And it turned out that what was happening in the worst cases were erasure parties. Principal and some teachers get together, they order in a pizza, they erase a section, and they grid in what they believe to be the right answer. Tests are not shipped with keys. list of right answers. So sometimes they get it wrong, and all of the answers that were there before are erased, and what they think is the right answers are put in. But you end up with a situation with all of the 20 or 25 students in the class chose exactly the same wrong answer, which never, ever happens, but can happen when you're grading them in. And if those class sizes sound small, 20 to 25, that really was the situation in Atlanta. They had extremely small class sizes compared to the typical district. I think I should go on, Skylar, just to get to the last section.
Sure, I'll go ahead and save some of these questions for the end. Go ahead, John.
Sure. These are 4 areas where you might consider seeking assistance to be sure that you don't end up being another Atlanta. And these are ways that we actually provide services at Caveon, but the ideas are good whether or not you would choose to get that help from us. So let's move to the first one, the test security audit. And that concept is to look at everything you do that impacts test security, find out where you're vulnerable, and then prioritize actions to correct your vulnerabilities. And I would not consider it a security audit unless it was done externally. It's sort of like evaluating your own children. Are they handsome? Are they beautiful? Are they talented? Of course they are, by definition. They're your children. Similarly, your test security practices, have someone else look at them and let everybody know you're doing that. It shows your seriousness about security. And the next slide simply reflects that. That's our conception of an audit. It's done by experienced outside professionals. It's done with explicit standards, and it gives immediate feedback. And in the practice that we've developed and the procedures, we use 250 standards. There's nothing like it anywhere in the field except where we've contributed to other agencies. And then the last slide in this set. These are the topics, the 15 different topics that we cover in our test security audits. I won't read through them all, but the first 4, 1 through 4, are kind of management issues. And then 5 through 9 are designing, developing, administering, scoring tests, the kind of stuff that your assessment staff would do in a program. And then the last batch are quality control features of a testing program. And note that the newest one in our list, conducting security investigations, is one that we've been drawn into as more and more people have found the need to do that. Some places absolutely want to do their investigations themselves. Other places absolutely do not want to do the investigations themselves. So we get to work with some of those folks. As I mentioned, that was not the problem in Atlanta, that they didn't have good procedures, but those procedures were not good in following through on investigations. That was a clear weakness. They were too prone to say, well, these are just people who don't like us, and that's why they say we're cheating, rather than fully investigating and listening to the complaints that they got. And the situation apparently got so bad that you couldn't complain. If you were a teacher or an administrator and you complained because you thought you saw something, if you were a new teacher, you weren't renewed in your contract. If you're an existing teacher, you might be transferred someplace you didn't want to be until the word got out, don't report problems because nothing good will happen as a result. Next slide, which is a different topic. Psychometric analyses. What we haven't invented the term data forensics. It's widely used. There's a data forensic society, indeed. But I think we are responsible for its widespread use within education. And it's using advanced statistical techniques to look at your test data. Has any one or more of your tests been compromised? When and where was it compromised? And what we used to do in testing, and I've been around a long time. This is not my 5th decade. This is my 6th decade. I'm 50 years working in testing. The things that we used to do, do some year-to-year comparisons, look at the individual level for large gains. That's not enough anymore. You need to do more sophisticated analysis. Next slide. If you do good analyses, then you'll be able to base your judgments on real decisions. You can train people to what to look for from threats that you know. You can detect and deter cheaters and get ahead of their ingenious invention of new methods to cheat, which keeps occurring all the time. You can evaluate your changes you make in test administration with data. Is it working? And it is, again, evidence of strong action to your community and your boards and whatever. You're willing to bring in outside experts to improve your performance. And the next slide, which is a graph chart, something we're very pleased with in Caveon Test Security. When we opened our doors 9 years ago, we told people that we have these good methods. If you follow them, you'll have less trouble. But it was mostly based on experiences we've had in different companies before Caveon. Now we have Caveon Test Security results. This is the whole state. This is tracking irregularities, which is a generic word for things that shouldn't have happened at administration. And over this span of time, a 72% reduction in irregularities, not just because of data forensics. The state did kind of full court press here, more monitoring of test administrations, willingness to consider schools conditional, give results out and say they're not final to investigate, pressing districts to follow through. And what happened is when follow through occurred, even though the district said it first, that can't be. I know those kids, I know that teacher. When finally confronted, you got students confessing, and the state got the satisfaction of hearing a district or school test coordinator get up and say, you know, I didn't believe the results at first, but we followed through, and we're finding that this data is accurate and it tells us important things, which is, you can't want better than that if you do our kind of work. We have another slide, Skylar, I believe.
Another poll, John.
Another poll, I mean.
Yeah, Skylar.
I'm going to launch it here.
Okay.
And the poll here is, for the last 3 years, has your testing program conducted cheating detection analyses, also known as data forensics? And the options here are yes for every administration, yes, but only occasionally, and also no, I'm afraid not. So we'll give about a minute here for answers to come in, and then we'll see the results. Okay, about another 15 seconds. If you haven't had a chance to vote yet, please do so. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now and we can see the results. And they are, John. The question is, for the last 3 years, has your testing program conducted cheating detection analyses, data forensics? And the results are yes for every administration, that's 27%. Yes, but only occasionally, that's 36%. And the no's are 38%.
This is encouraging to me. That's close to 2/3 do at least some data forensics analyses, and I think that's going to become standard. Everything that I'm aware of in psychometrics that we've invented, piloted, and figured out how to do, we've then incorporated. It's a very data-using group, the kind of people who manage and run testing programs. You wouldn't run a testing program and not regularly evaluate your tests on a number of dimensions, and this is one of the dimensions that I think is going to become standard. In the state markets, it's going to be written into RFPs and contracts. It's going to become basic. You see a lot of evidence of it now in the medical and the IT space, and it's a good thing to do. One of the challenges that we find those who do this kind of work and explain it, is that it tends to be complicated, and we want to tell people lots more than they want to know. So finding simple, clear, understandable, actionable results. That's what people keep asking us. We want results we can act on. Make it clear exactly how much of a problem we have and where in your judgment we should take action. They'll make the decision. They don't want us to make the decision, but they want really good advice from us about how they should proceed. So can we go back to our slides? There's just 2 more areas I want to touch on. Web patrolling is looking out on the internet to see if your secure items are out there, or in certification programs, what you sometimes find, more often than I wish were true, it's people volunteering to take the test for you. Save you all that trouble of going to the administration. Just send your ID and money, and they'll send someone to take the test for you and send you your credential. It occurs in high-stakes testing. I guess people don't bother otherwise. Long testing windows tend to lead to leakage of items, and that is already a problem in the state assessment world, and it's going to get worse. As the consortia introduce their computer-based tests, there simply aren't enough computers or other devices, so there are going to be long testing windows. And toward the end of that window, in fact, even halfway through, the items are going to be escaping, and later test takers are going to be using the results that were taken by earlier test takers. Web patrol involves searching tools, although it's not so much a mechanistic thing where you use the best types of search engines. The real work of the job is analyzing those results, synthesizing them, picking the ones that are worth following up on, and then acting very quickly. So if you have items that are out on the web, they don't have to be there very long, and they just morph and go everywhere. And it doesn't matter if you took them down from the first site. So as soon as you find them, you have to get them off. There's quite a bit of this in web patrolling in certification testing, not so much in education, except in situations where they think there was a breach. Next slide. Another place where you might want to go for help, depending on your style of your organization, is conducting investigations. At the start, deciding what cases warrant follow-up. If you make it easy for people to report problems, you may get a lot of reports of problems. What do you do with them? Our advice is use all available data, both in deciding whether to follow up and then in following up. In the school environment, it means interviewing teachers, test coordinators, principals, and something you need to be aware of if you've not done much of this. When you ask someone, how is it they have this unusual result? Amazing amounts of agreement among students, unusual erasures, whatever it is, student results that don't follow a logical pattern. They get the hard questions right and they miss the easy questions. Any strange pattern. The first response is always, and I don't use the word always lightly. I'm trained in test development. Ordinarily, if it says always, it means it's wrong. But in this case, it is always. If you talk to someone about a problem, their first response is, we don't have a problem. Nothing was wrong in Mr. Adicut's class. I don't know why you ask, but I don't know why you bother us. It's because you always go after fill-in-the-blank schools, rural schools, urban schools, whatever it is. And there is a strong reason, a lot of strong reasons, why you should be careful in your analysis of results. Careers could be at stake, reputations of schools, licenses, walking around free can be put at risk on the basis of your conducting an investigation. So you need very solid evidence. And we very strongly advise, don't follow up on every statistically significant result. Start with the very clear-cut cases where if you brought 10 reasonable men and women and they showed you those results, they would say, oh, yeah, you are right to follow up on this. This is a problem. and then publicize what you do, and your goal is in the long run to have less cheating, more valid data, not to catch every single perpetrator every single time. I know it's not the legal model, but I don't think this is a good place for the legal model. I don't think it would be a better society if you had 61 trained investigators go into every school district that thought they had a problem. I think the total outcome probably would be more negative than positive. So, I think we're ready for another set of questions, if there are any.
Yeah, John, we do have a set of questions here. Let me go back and make sure I cover the ones that we didn't get at the start. One comment here, John, earlier on in the session was, I hope this is as great as John's presentation for National Association of Test Directors. That was a great meeting. So you did get a comment there.
Lovely.
So kudos.
My favorite comment so far.
Let's see. Okay, another question that we had earlier on was when did all of this occur? When did this cheating scandal with Atlanta Public Schools occur?
Well, it broke in 2010, intensified in 2011, but the evidence of cheating goes back further, at least to 2008, probably earlier. I think it was like a virus, not a computer virus, but a infection that spread through the system. And I don't know this. I haven't read this anyway. I'm envisioning some folks say, you know what we did, and we got bonuses and made our school look better. Not, on a website, not said at a public meeting, but maybe folks who went to the same school together or belong to the same community group or something. And it's not over, although the examples of troublesome data did drop between 2010 and 2011, and I would guess that they'll drop again. I mean, if you work in the Atlanta schools, I was telling someone probably they threw away all the erasers in any of the buildings and broke them off the pencils so there would be no erasures, just to make sure nobody could say that they were erasing.
We do have another question here that says, that's more related to the internet and computer-based tests. It says, what kinds of adult-led cheating occurs with online computer-based tests?
Well, unfortunately, except for erasures and making copies of test books, which you don't have quite the same problem, everything else occurs. So one common way is to gain access to the bank and then prep your students on the bank. If you have linear tests, fixed form tests, that can be just as successful as in paper and pencil. If you have computer adaptive tests where the next question depends on the previous questions, it isn't as effective, but people still do it. And if you teach some significant fraction of the harder questions in a bank, you can give a real advantage to someone. Helping during the exam in situations where the teachers don't know the students, having them shift places. So I sign in as John Fremer, but then I move over to Steve Adicott's terminal and respond for him. So there are all kinds of things that can happen. We used to think, and I'll admit that I was of that opinion once upon a time, that the shift over to computer-based testing would dramatically decrease problems of cheating. Unfortunately, that's not proved to be true. They've changed, but they haven't gone away. And I think there's a little bit of a honeymoon period. When you first introduce it, you don't get as much cheating right away because they haven't figured out how to do it. But you have a lot of ingenious people out there, and unfortunately, part of the way they use that ingenuity is to do bad things in testing.
Thank you, John, for that answer and also for the introduction to this next question that we got that says, where will we go next? What will we do to improve psychometric analysis to detect cheating as we move to high-stakes computer administration systems?
I think we're all going to hear about that at this University of Kansas conference. And I'm expecting, although I don't know that this is a decision, there will be follow-up work from that conference, white papers and the like. I am a co-editor with Jim Wallach at the University of Wisconsin, and we have a book coming out next year, The Handbook of Test Security, which tries to summarize where we are at this point in time. And my friend and colleague Dennis Maines of Caveon has written a very good sort of where we stand chapter in that book, which will be coming out in that venue. You can see that the conferences too, all of us in what's called the testing industry go to the Association of Test Publishers Conference annually, and the number of presentations there and the number of projects of a group called the Security Council are quite large and very productive. So we're working on the problem. I think there's a lot more work to do, but there's a lot of people on it. And one of the things I've been looking for, and it's just started to happen, is I think we're going to start getting dissertations about cheating detection methods. So that can bring another whole generation of eager and smart folks working on it.
And John, thanks for touching on the conference at University of Kansas. I do have another question here that just says, who from Caveon will be presenting in Kansas next week?
Dennis Maines. I think Dave Foster is also presenting, although I'm not sure that he will be there. And one of the folks on the phone with me, Steve Atticott, will be there. But even though he's terrific at data forensics because of his intensive life experience in statistics, I don't think he's presenting.
Yeah, that was very tongue-in-cheek. This is Steve. Dennis is the only Caveoner who is presenting, but Dave Foster and I will be there as well. A couple of points about that. If you go to Caveon.com, to the Resources tab, under Events, you can find information out about the conference on statistical detection of potential test fraud. Registration ends this afternoon, so if it is feasible for you to attend and you've not yet registered, the window is closing this afternoon. Certainly there's travel involved, but the actual cost of the conference is only $75, and it will be a very interesting couple of days, I think. So I've got 10:54. We always strive to keep these under an hour. Do you feel like answering one more question, John?
If there's one that sounds like it needs to be answered, I'll try.
Let's see.
Maybe
John,
the last one, Steve?
Well, I was going to go with John. Do you have a sense of how many states have laws that would jail or imprison educators for cheating or for security breaches?
How many have jailed or imprisoned?
How many?
Is that the question?
How many states have laws where jail or imprisonment could be a penalty for educator-led cheating?
Actually, not many. In some cases, it's not even a crime, but that's changing. The most common thing that states do is go after the license of a teacher or principal who has misbehaved as a professional breach. We should probably stop at this point and just flash up our last slide just because they give information.
Yeah, so we invite everyone to, we welcome feedback, and so we'll start a thread on our LinkedIn page about this session, and we'll also strive to answer any of the questions that were not addressed. So please take a look at our LinkedIn group, the Caveon Test Security group, where we can further the conversation today. We'd love to engage with you through our other social media channels, and we welcome you to join us next month. We've got a webinar coming up on June 20th with Dr. Jamie Mulkey presenting Tales from an Examnivore, utilizing test development resources to support your test program. So look for more details on that session coming up, and we hope to see you again at one of the upcoming events.
I'll just add my voice saying thank you, and do feel free to email or call me about test security issues. I'd like to help as many as possible not to become another Atlanta. It's one of my life missions now.
Thanks for attending, everybody. Have a great day. Hope to see you next time.